banter now that we're recording.
Yeah, like imagine
I forget how to banter.
Imagine we were bantering in a forcible manner about it being week 8, that we have now successfully done 2 months of these recordings.
That's 2 months.
It's 2 months. 2 months of initial banter that we just did the meta narrative to get here. So for the 8 people that are going to watch this for week 8, congratulations. You're in the inside joke land here. So it is week 8. We're going to kick off. I'm going to show something I refactored that Mike and Chuck have been working on. After that, Mike is going to show some more fun things that he's been working on as far as studio side. And studio in their case, and if Nikki mentions studio later, studio in Eberly's case is more on the 3D spin an object, put data points on it type of thing, versus arts and architecture will do studio a little differently, and Nikki might end up showing a couple of those studio comps. And then Reed, who has been one of my students this semester doing independent study projects, going to walk us through a date picker, or not date picker, sorry, a date visual, an element that's showing you like, hey, here's what the date is, and here's when this event is. So we'll do some live feedback on that. And then I know Andrew has a question about how to do popovers with complex content, and Nikki wants to, as usual, show off because she's done some awesome work in Storybook, but then says like, I already showed Storybook, but it's phenomenal looking because obviously she Nikki'd it. So
I'm with myself.
I'm gonna kick off showing something that's just cool. I stumbled on this today on Twitter. It's called stippled image. I haven't implemented it yet, but there's a little glitch me thing. And what it does is it takes an image and then it runs a calculation and forms this interesting little dot-based version of it. So you might see this in like the Wall Street Journal a lot of times for like who the author of an article was will have this silly looking kind of a almost like newspaper print style article thing. So it wasn't, oh, there it is, live example. So the live example of it, like you can see it actually does the deformation in real time, which I thought was pretty cool. I don't know that I actually want to use it then, because I thought it would just kind of take a picture of the, I have to do edit or remix. I didn't realize it was gonna like do that in real time. So I don't know how resource intensive it is. I thought it would kind of render it differently, but so I'm gonna change this to be a picture of me. So we'll see what the source picture is. It's very close up on my face, obviously. Those make for the best pictures for these types of things. So then I do view app, and it's hard to see because of how much distortion there is. You can zoom it out a bit and you can see my glasses because it has a set width. I think you have to give it a width ahead of time. Let me see if oh yeah, width. Okay, so if we did, and you can change the sampling. Like I haven't really played with this much, but if we change the width to, we'll say like 1,000, and then view app. So the sampling is the spacing of it. So you can actually mess with it. Let's make sampling more like 10 then. That'll probably make it more clear. There we go. So it's I don't know how, I mean, the fans on my computer are going nuts. I don't know if it's because of this little emulation thing going on here, but it is pretty stinking neat. So I did want to point to it.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be, if it's just a pure front-end component, just a pure web component, then it would have to be pretty dynamic like that. Were you thinking that it would sort of go away and come back with the final result?
Yeah, I thought it would be more of like a CSS transform almost, where like you could grayscale something where it would distort it. And I haven't dug into this much beyond looking at the initial entry point, but it's interesting. It invokes a worker.
There you go.
And I have not seen that before. So at least I've never, dug into something that does it. Now this is in TypeScript. So for those of you at home, TypeScript is the work of the devil. And so when Satan wanted to make code completely unreadable to junior developers while simultaneously increasing the tooling required to view that code, Satan decided to generate TypeScript or .ts. So I only somewhat joke. I hate TypeScript. I hate it. But it's just because it requires compiling. But you can see this is a vanilla JavaScript element in TypeScript. And then the interesting piece is with this worker script from worker, which you can see then it's just saying, hey, make a blob out of that and then render the blob. So the worker script is doing everything. Now, I don't know what the heck this is. I don't know what this is at all.
So
they clearly took this from somewhere.
Yeah, the worker this is how you're communicating between the DOM and the worker is with this message event bus, right? Mm-hmm. So for those who aren't familiar with web workers, it's just a way for you to do processing that's off the main thread. So if this were not being processed off the main thread, you wouldn't be able to do virtually anything on the page as this thing is resampling. So like you wouldn't be able to scroll around and you wouldn't have any JavaScript animations going on at the same time. So there's a good talk by who does the 203 HTTP 203 podcast from Google? Surma?
That sounds right.
Okay. He delves into this pretty in depth in a few videos and explains that like workers are a little bit slower, but anything that you can get off the main thread, your app will appear way faster to the end user. So yeah, I think web components are a good way of abstracting that from most people, because that's a confusing concept.
Yeah, and in this instance specifically, right, there's some serious math going on to manipulate that image, and then clearly, you know, even with kind of having it fizzle back in, you could just drop this in the page of a larger app, and that sending it off the main thread, that'll kind of figure itself out and add itself later without doing render blocking or being really CPU resource intensive, as that seems like it could be with a big image. So just wanted to point out, I thought it's pretty cool. So what I actually wanted to show, dipping into some code, is Mike and Chuck have been working on this, which I believe they've set up in HAX 11. So it's just a static one page, and it's got some elements that they've used in previous work. Pull open code here, right? So there's a course card, and there's homepage banner and page top and page footer scroll button. So first of all, the scroll button they didn't make. That's something we just have on our generic element set that we use in other places. So that's a good example of like, I don't want to ever think about that concept again, right? So just throw down the scroll button. However, I have wanted to steal this header from their websites before. And I believe this is odl.science.psu.edu. That banner should look pretty familiar, right? So there it is right there. And it's got this nice offset area, and for all I know, it might even be homepage banner. Wow, it's like I knew that ahead of time. It's bizarre. So part of why I bring this up, right? Homepage banner is a pretty abstract name, but yet it's still, if I take out image and I take out alt and I take out a Creative Studio Classroom, it still says ODL and it has the ODL logo, and it has the text didn't update for whatever reason. So how I wanted to take this and make it something more abstract. So a lot of the ways that we end up working with web components will meet a specific use case. In this case, the ODL site, and then go, wow, wouldn't it be great to reuse that? And sure enough, we're right in position to reuse that on this other website. And then a lot of times I get bored or I've had a terrible week and say, I need an easy win. And so I just blatantly steal Mike and Chuck's well-designed elements and repurpose them for everybody. So I've added it to the product card repo, which is off of LRN web components. So these are up there. It's actually in the product card NPM resource now, so you can yarn install it. So I'm going to fire this up, and now on our demo, previously we just had product card. So if you've seen some past episodes, we have this as a listing so that you can look through different elements in HAX. But I just started adding these other ones here, and I actually put a couple of them together so we could see how they stack. So one thing I really like, and I don't think this was their intention, Mike, you're free to chime in, but it actually, the way the logo works, it ends up making it look like it glues together with the thing below it, just because of how they've offset it. So I stacked 3 of these together. So we have the original one in this case, which is OER courses, but I've just re-implemented it using my more abstract form of the same tag so that then I can have Elm's Learning Network with a logo and HAX the Web with the logo. So what that ends up looking like it's called Product Banner is the name of that, that's right. So I took their web component and it was based on lit element, and I actually switched it to use simple colors instead. So I know we've brought up simple colors multiple times, but I realized we didn't actually ever show like what the big deal is with implementing it, other than like Nikki's awesome series of colors and CSS classes is usually what we get bogged down in. So simple colors is actually a base class, and it's built on top of lit element. I can actually trace into this and we'll see, well, there's a simple colors super class, and then we wrap that on lit element so that you can use either. So if you're using vanilla HTML, you could pull this in, which is why we make it the super class. Or if you just want to use the one that we already have, you can use that. And I also bring this up. I know I saw in some of Reed's code, he's using it as a direct element. So I will be curious to see Nikki's reaction to that, because I haven't seen us do that ever. But the big thing simple colors get you beyond all these CSS variables has to do with properties and then being reflected to attributes. So you can see there's a dark flag basically, and then you have these baseline properties like accent color, dark, and you can actually dig in and get access to the whole color set as code, but I think I've used that once. So the primary reasons I implemented are for these two. So I have accent color and dark. So then if you want to use that, because you're extending from a different base class, when I have my properties, I have to do this spread super.properties and then add my own. So what this is the equivalent of is more or less inheriting the properties from the element below it, in this case, simple colors. So imagine that this is as if I have accent color here, right? And the stuff written, but it's accountable back to one place. If Nikki decides to change that connotation in a intentional way, we just get that gain and everything that implements it. So then there's no default, but I set it to orange just to have one. And then similar to the properties, I got to inherit the styles. So then I do a spread of super.styles. This is also part of why when we build out static get styles, we recommend returning an array of values. You don't have to do that. Justin Fajani, who is the core maintainer of lit element, said there's no performance difference between just adding the styles one way or the other, but I think it's more readable to do it this way. So then I add in my styles. Now, when I want to use those colors in a meaningful way, I know we've gotten into, color overrides and when you name things a certain way. Let's not get lost in those details for once. So branding wrap is the piece that I enhance. So their baseline branding wrap is just this E2801E, which is effectively the color code of Eberly College of Science's Office of Digital Learning. Let's just say that's what it is. Well, I want to make it whatever the user has defined. So I could do that via CSS variable, right? So there's the ability to do product banner text color in this case. Or if we use Nikki's colors, we can do this pretty cool thing where we tap into accent color. So accent color is variable and it's pegged to that attribute changing. So if you say accent hyphen color equals blue, this variable is going to give you the 7th shade of blue versus green, red, orange, anything else that we have defined. And so what you can do is you can effectively programmatically set color contrast ratios between things. And so if I have default theme accent, right, 7, or if I said this was default theme accent 1, we could actually, and I'll save that so we can see what it does. That effectively allows us to tweak the difference between these colors in real time. So if I select this one with the logo, now in product banner, I can change accent color to be purple. And because that CSS variable effectively ends up getting changed, see, because of the way that that cascades, it just makes that the right color. Then if I say dark, I can tap into those colors in the same way and see it basically inverts them. But in this case, I've done it in such a way, you know, knowing the way that dark operates, that I can maintain the accessibility of the other pieces of this. So now you can put product banners in dark mode, and you'll see it inverts the color relationship here, but it also does it on the bar. The other piece where I just changed that value has to do with this outline. So you can set things to static values, right? So if I just said gray 1, in this case, right, that's going to be a gray outline. And then if we do, we inspect this and we tell it to be dark, it's going to also respect that, because gray 1 in dark mode is actually its inverse. So you end up getting black in this case. Versus before, I had a nice ratio between them. I'll show another one with the ratios in a second. So then I do a couple more enhancements based on what Mike and Chuck had. I actually do conditional rendering of the values. So in this case, and this gets a little lit element specific, so I try to avoid doing it as much as possible, but it does make it cleaner and more performant. This is going to say, hey, if there's primary text, then render a heading 1 with this class wrapping it. Otherwise, render nothing. So you can do ternary format directly inline. I do that for the image, or sorry, the image text. It's not the image. It does require an image, or it makes no sense. The image text, the logo, and the secondary text. So what that means is in here, I can go up to primary text of HAX camp. And here, let's do 2 window split so it's easier to see this. I'm going to do HAX camp. We'll do stuff, right? But if I just get rid of it outright, it goes away. So it's conditionally rendering that little blob there. So then I can do green, flip it over that, and then I can do secondary text. Goes away, right? Now I just have an image, you know, text and text. So maybe what I could do is we would have an implementation of this. We have primary text stuff. Maybe we don't actually end up having secondary text, but it still ends up, you know, being the same general tenor of what that visual asset is supposed to be. Then I also have support for dropping the logo. So you could just have the, where's a better one? Logo, there we go, okay. So let's get rid of that logo. And so now I have Elm's Learning Network. It has that little message on it. It's got this band. And it's got some half decent mobile responsive, right? So if we take the logo off, it doesn't stack, but it looks correct, right? So we're not trying to make it look perfect. We're trying to account for, well, what if you have content that doesn't have this? The conditional rendering is a nice way to cleanly be able to deal with that without getting in all kind of goofy CSS classwork. So that was the first one I ended up doing, and now it's called product banner. So we can add product banners to anything as a nice exercise in abstraction. The other one that I did is called course card. And course card is one that we've had previously in our setup. Now in here, it's this little card that says Astro, has the background picture, an icon, and then some additional text, as well as who's this by. I believe this was at some level taken from work that Arts and Architecture did. So we have, let's see if I can go to it. Yeah, okay, so this is a card that we actually use in production. It's a card, and the image, you know, lazy loads, and it's raised. And at one time, it actually did have the icon. I think if you click on it, yeah, if you click on it, this is a variation on it that ends up putting the icon as an overlay. So while not the same, right, there's some influence as far as those being very similar. So instead of this being specific to the OER site, and instead of me having that other card, I want to get rid of my other card effectively. So course card, we'll see, I've once again done the simple colors trick. I end up extending it and spreading the properties, spread the styles, and then I end up doing a consistent color ratio between different aspects of the element in the design. So what I mean by that is previously we had that border and I said, oh, well, just make it theme accent 1, or sorry, I had theme gray 1, right? And that made sure that the border was gonna be gray. But doing something like this, what this is effectively saying is, hey, the link, the color of the text in the link, make that the lightest possible thing, or sorry, darkest possible thing. Make that the darkest possible accent color. Now that could barely be detectable as being whatever the color is, if it's green, but it still has a hue of green. Then the background color is the lightest possible version of the same thing. So you can kind of make it look like it's tinted green without needing to worry about accessibility. And then I do the same thing with the border. So I make a slight variation in the border that's just a little bit darker than the background color of that. So end up doing that in a similar offsetting way in multiple places. Like whenever you have, and I also, in their original element, they had a hover state. I like to make my focus, hover, and active states identical. So either I'll do it via JavaScript if I really need to, or I'll do it in CSS. Is I'll set the outline and whatever the action is for all three. That way, if you tab through or you hover over it, you end up getting the same effect. But I do a similar thing with that, right? So there's the outline and then there's a box shadow, and these are also going to be throttled relative to the color in question. I do that for all of them, even the icon and even the fill of the icon, which makes these rather interesting because we have SVG-based icons across the board. So using Nikki's approach and the SVG-based icons, we can make these nice tinted colored icons. So this is the original, right? And they're all blank, more or less, white with a light gray. This is what we're now able to do. So there's that original one, and this is the default. So like they could take this and implement it and get the exact same thing they want. However, now when we apply the other things to it, right, we can now take that, and there's the hover state, right? So there's a hover state that's slightly red or blue or green, or there's the defaults, or there's orange. These three are dark. Right? So they take that icon and they remix it to basically be that the interior of the icon is dark and then the fill is light. But then if we don't have dark on, then we get a darker fill and a lighter interior to it. So looking at those, right, we inspect it. I'm going to take this from red over to purple, and it's going to be the exact same color contrast ratios to things. I could also take this and put a dark flag on it, and then we have a dark purple one in this case. This is a approach I lifted because I like stealing concepts for myself. So I lifted this from RetroCard. So RetroCard does a very similar thing. I'll just actually show a demo of RetroCard. I don't need to go into the code because you see exactly the way that ends up working. So the same relationship I use in RetroCard, so that as you tab through the cards, you get this very similar type of like, well, do this flip between the colors, right? And that those are all ratio based. So that down in the DOM code, right, if I would change this accent color to be yellow or whatever, and it's not guaranteed that, it's always going to look wonderful with what these are, that, might still require like that. Holy crap. It's very blown out, but that's actually the point of the way that this one is designed, is to be blown out. So not all colors are going to work with this because you can see it's doing a opacity layer and grayscale to the images. And it actually has support for 2 images, so you can give this effect that something's animated. Like if you've seen people's company cards at like cool company X, and then when you hover over it does like, people in the call can see me. I'm doing a really weird face. So that's how I ended up approaching that. It's kind of more life cycle-y. I still have this, work in progress, basically, but they did a really good job as far as these looking good as the baseline. So then I'm just tweaking them really.
So whenever you're choosing the right color for the, let's say that you want to make sure that the outline of the icon is like a specific purple color, and you don't really care what the other colors are. Like you're not saying like it has to be a specific color, that like background, as long as the ring around that icon is good. So the process would be going to the simple colors grid and picking out like your perfect color, making that the property value or the variable value, and then just sort of.
Yep. Here. Oh, cool. Yeah. Bring up the demo.
So that's basically what I end up doing as now.
I built a demo.
In the case of your card, I said, oh, well, this is already well designed. There's an intentional ratio between these. So I kind of just guessed and said like, oh, that orange is sort of like orange 7.
Gotcha.
And so if I apply orange 7, then it'll probably look pretty good here now. And then I go across and go, oh, well, orange 12 and orange 1. Okay. So yeah, I end up looking at these. The thing with Nikki's naming convention is, right, if I want this to specifically always be orange, right, I use simple colors, default theme, orange 7 in this case. Or if I want it to be variable, you can, and it's accent driven, then any of those are always simple colors, default theme, accent, hyphen, whatever.
And if you don't want a color to switch from dark to light mode, maybe that one color stays. Instead of default theme, I think I have it listed as fixed theme.
Yeah, it said fixed there, which I've never used, so that's good to know that that's what.
Yeah, for the Alley Media Player, I wanted the choice to make the transcript dark. Either like always be light unless you specifically choose, and so I created this this fixed theme for it, because sometimes there are things that have to be in a certain color no matter what mode.
Right.
And it should give you, it gives you which colors can be used with which to maintain those WCAG 2.0 AA ratios.
Nice.
Keeping in mind that there are different ratios for small text and large text.
Right.
Yeah, it works really well. And now I've got a good enough handle from doing it a few times that I just, when I see something that has a decent color ratio or could use a color, and you guys end up using orange, there's some color, Nikki always ends up tending towards, I can just basically steal that and then go like, well, okay, let's just instead make the default accent color orange and then make it 7 so it looks identical still. But then you've got that variability in it that someone could, pick it up and say, well, I don't want it to be orange, I want it to be blue. And we go, okay, then make it blue. Like, it's not a total redesign of the asset.
That makes sense.
In future, I'd love to, I might create a second accent variable and like a third, like a primary and a secondary, tertiary. And eventually I want to be able to let, developers self-define colors. The challenge is we don't want the average user to define all those shades. So I've also been playing around with the idea of using math to calculate, but that's down the road.
So yeah, I probably do some more, I just threw this together pretty quickly, but I want to do some more to it to at least clean it up a little bit, but that is the general way that I end up implementing the simple color stuff. Oh, and you can see as I tab through, you end up getting that same exact class applied in style as the other one. So yeah.
Well done. Looks awesome.
That was all I had. And then the other nice thing with that, obviously, is that then we wire that up to HAX and we go, oh, well, yeah, you can use accent color. And now you allow a user to change the accent color, and it's really easy to set.
That would be a really cool option for looking at the sites when you go into Axiom.
Yeah, the reason I'm lifting that from what they've done is there's basically the way the HAX CMS dashboard works right now is it reads the file system at runtime and goes, oh, here's where these folders are. And then it reads off the site.json files and builds a new site.json that's fake on the fly. And so that's why you end up getting your listing of courses, or not courses, but like sites that you've worked on. So using an identical approach, or even putting it into that grid, like I used to visualize that data as cards. And then we got feedback from people like, I'm never on this page. I don't need it to look pretty. It's like, yeah, but other people searching for them do. So I want to make oer.hax.pcu.edu have this nice landing page that is a curated list of things that we are saying are available from HAX. And I say curated because we just had students turn in final projects, and Reed did final project as well last semester. So we've got roughly 70 or so OER courses that people did as their final project. Now, course, it's more like a little training module, learning module about a specific topic, but the topics are all over the map. As you know, I teach this course more and more. So this semester we had some I was sharing around that are about like how to be an adult. Like, hey, here's the things you didn't learn in school. You got to pay taxes. But it's a nice 10-page thing that's funny, and it has little self-checks in it, and it uses all the tools from it. So, you know, if we made a nice grid that just shows what all those are, and then people can peruse through them, I think it'd be a good entry point into. I'd also like to make a branding bar. I don't know if, Potter, if you've had a need for this at all, but a bar that you could not just jump between the courses, but like it's very thin and could just be like a go back to the, you know, OER listing. But then on that, we could also put like a fork button.
You're recreating like the old school web ring.
Yeah, you're making, we've got my zine, and you're going to jump into my web ring with my zine, except in this world, you would be able to go to someone's course and be like, you know what, that's wrong, fork it, or do an edit and contribute and fix whatever the thing is. We have all the stuff in place. We just don't have UIs to surface it. So anywho, I believe, Mike, were you up next?
Yes.
Bake it away, toys.
Okie dokie. All right, so here we are back again with the, wait, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Back again with the Model Viewer Studio. Going to show some of my progress on that. So again, what we're talking about here is there's this magical web component called Model Viewer. It's by the folks at Google. And what it allows you to do is you give it a 3D model that's like a GLTF or GLB, and it will render it to the screen in this virtual reality window here. Pretty cool. Now, what a lot of people want to use these models for is to do hotspotting. And that's what we're doing a Bones project, where you can click around the different portions of a scanned 3D bone, and you can select the different hotspotted labels on them to get more information about that specific section of the bone. If you go to the example on the Model Viewer website, it will give you an example of how you can add the hotspots, which are actually called annotations. Now, there's a caveat to that, and that is that they're not easy to add. So the onus is on you to figure out exactly where in 3D space, in this virtual reality model, you want this annotation to go. As long as you know that, you can plug it into what's known as the data position attribute, and you will get this little annotation somewhere on your model. So we obviously need to make that easier for people to add hotspots to these models. So that is what we've been working on. It's called Model Viewer Studio, and it's made up of two pieces. So this is actually a monorepo that I'm clicking in. And the two pieces are MV Studio app, which is the web component, and then a backend. And this backend is just a tiny web server that's listening for calls from the MV Studio app to save changes to this model. So it's assuming that your model is going to be basically an HTML file right now. So how do we use this? So what I did was I copied this example from the model viewer website, this astronaut, and I plugged it into an HTML file. And right now it's really tiny. So I'm going to put height of 100 VH and I think a width of 100%. All right. So here we go. That is exactly what is on the Model Viewer Studio, or the Model Viewer website. Now, how will this MV Studio app help us here? Well, what we can do is we can just add a script to import our web component. So I'm going to import, is it just MV Studio app.js? And I'm going to wrap the MV Studio app tag around my model viewer tag. All right, so this is just going to wrap around the existing model viewer tag. And now that we've done that, we have a slightly augmented user experience. So it's taking the model viewer and putting it into more of an app-like experience where the hotspots are now listed on the left where we can toggle them on and off. And right now it's just listing the ones that have annotations. So that's why only one is showing up here. Okay, so that is cool, but we need to make it a little bit cooler. So I'm also going to import a CSS file. It's just going to add a little bit more. There we go. So it's going to add some CSS that will hide the hotspot if this thing is not toggled on and off. All right. So what if we want to start editing these annotations? Well, we can click the edit button here, and I can click on a hotspot. Oh, let's delete that one. Let's try to edit this hotspot here. So if I click on a hotspot in edit mode, you can see that it's telling me what the unique ID is, what position it has on the model, and it allows me to fill out an annotation. So we can say helmet. And it doesn't look like this model is allowing me to do that for some reason. Oh, I know why. The attributes are different. Okay, so let's jump over to this other example because I already have this one done. So this example should be something very similar. So it's structured almost identically to the other one. It's a model of this flight helmet, and it has annotations just like the other one did. We're doing the same thing where we're importing our web component and we're importing that CSS, and we're getting that exact same Model Viewer Studio experience. So here we can click edit, and we can, let's say that we want to add a hotspot for right here. So I'm gonna, while I'm in edit mode, click somewhere on the model, and for annotation, I'm gonna say hose, and click save. So you can see here that we now have a new, inside of the HTML file, we have a new button with an annotation for hose. It recorded, it has a unique ID, it recorded the exact position. And the way that it's doing that is, first of all, it's utilizing, again, that web component, the MV Studio app web component. And the MV Studio app web component is assuming that there is a little web server running in the background. And the web server is this MV Studio CLI. So this is sort of like we were talking about last week, which the combination of a web component that can talk to a backend. Last week's case was an R web component that could process R code in the background and come back with the answer. This is similar, where the web component is collecting all of the data for where the annotations are in the DOM, and it's sending them to a little microservice backend. And it's saving those changes. So as long as that's running, we can add some more hotspots here. Let's say that we want to add a hotspot right there for the logo. We can do that. We can click save. Oh, we've changed the orientation. So there's something called, what's it called? It's called camera target. So camera target is where you want the camera to start viewing in relation to this object. So right now the camera target is the top of the helmet. So if we want to change that to maybe, let's say, the bottom of the helmet, I'm going to click edit, and you can see this is where our camera target is right now. And I'm going to hold shift. Oops, was it shift click? Yes, shift click. So I want it to start down here. And maybe we'll add a hotspot there for the label. Hit save. And now not only is there a new label here, we've changed the orientation of the model. And again, this is all being tracked in an HTML file. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, so in the future, still working on it, but in the future you'll be able to run npx. I think it's just npx MV Studio, and then point it at a file that contains a model that you want to edit, something like that, and it will, popped it up over here. It will, right now it's not working, but it will handle injecting the MV Studio app tag around your current model that's in that file, and start the MV Studio server running so that you can actually save changes that you're making in the browser. And that is all I have to show this week, but it's getting a little bit better.
That's cool.
We're getting there.
Have you guys thought of making this like a desktop app or something? Like even just a super small one that just invokes those commands into Electron or something?
Yeah, I started doing that, and then I ran into a few issues with packaging them up. So I abandoned it, but yeah, that'd be the idea. So you could either run an npm command, or you could download the desktop app.
Is there any way to make the models transformable? Like, let's say, like you remove an earpiece or the goggles or something like that.
Oh, okay. No, right now it's just to manage the annotations, but yeah, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea. With the go ahead.
As you get there, I might be interested in trying to tinker with you on that, because there's a couple of uses in the library where we have wanted to use 3D models to represent some old materials, like pre-book old materials.
Okay.
That we want them to be able to be transformable, but because that's the requirement for being able to read it. But yeah, we had an really old plugin thing before WebGL even existed that used a Unity plugin for a while, but then yeah, so
Yeah.
that's something that sat around and it wants a solution someday.
In terms of like playing around with the model, do you mean just straight up hiding pieces, or do you mean like pulling them apart or manipulating them in other ways, like triggering animations?
Yeah, triggering an animation would be great. The particular project that I was referring to is for movable books. Basically, it's think of like a 9-panel brochure where like you can unfold it, and then you can unfold the top to open up upwards, and the bottom part folds downwards.
Gotcha.
And then you can fold and move all the different pieces independently.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's definitely doable. One of the benefits of the new GLTF and GLB formats is that you can package even the animations up in those files. So I could list out all of the animations that are listed in that file, and then it's pretty easy to trigger those. So that's a good idea.
Is it possible to connect multiple models together in Model Viewer? So like, let's say you had, I don't know, like the human body, and you can kind of like expand or like view specific parts, like the skull versus like the femur, but like look at the femur in detail, or like the hand, I would say is probably a better example, and the skull. So like the hand will have its own individual hotspots and points. But if you, I don't know, if you zoom out or go to the default like full view, and then you can click on the skull and then look at like the specific hotspots. So is that like possible, or is it kind of just like a one model, one file kind of deal for now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Eventually, the app that we're working on for the anatomy will behave just as you described. But I wasn't sure what the scope of this one tag should be. So that might be another tag that sits even higher up that implements MV Studio app. That incorporate that's like an entire application, basically. Like you're navigating many different models, and maybe you're putting different models together. So yeah, that's still something I'm considering.
I don't know if it's like along the same lines or not, but like, are you able to like load? So does Model Viewer only relate to one file? Like, does it only load and read the one? I forget what the file extension you said is, but is
GLB
it
or GLTF? Yep.
Yeah. So is it possible to make that? So like, let's say you had like a marine biology like class, with like the one model viewer tag. Would it be possible for me to do like a shark and like a minnow, or like something like that? Or is that kind of like what you described, doing kind of a MV Studio and kind of a more hierarchical tag doing multiple things? Because this is interesting. It looks really cool, and it kind of like takes me back to like kind of middle school, high school, looking at models and stuff like that. But I mean, obviously they weren't as nice as this, and they were using like specific proprietary software.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the model viewer tag just points to a model. Now you can do different things where you can take a bunch of different models and import those into Blender, and then like export a huge model that contains a few different models.
Yeah.
So you could do that, or probably more likely you would build an app that maybe dynamically injects using model viewer tag, like injecting a bunch of model viewer tags into the same page, and then coordinating different animations with those. So yeah, that's something to consider also.
Yeah, I'm sort of starting to wonder here if like does the model viewer, does it give you like a thumbnail, like a default thumbnail image?
Yeah, you can do that, I think. I think you can like lazy load. Let's see here. So there's a poster that loads first. And then I think you can, let's see. So this first loads the poster, and then, oh, it tests the usage of, so it first checks to make sure that your browser can actually render the model viewer. And then it replaces the poster with that. So something similar where you would have the poster and maybe not trigger the model viewer render until maybe in like in intersection observer fired. So you're scrolling on the page and the element actually comes into view. Then you can call render on the model viewer studio tag or the model viewer tag.
Yeah, that would be cool. I'm sort of wondering, like, I'm looking at the actual model viewer code in the background there with all like the different spatial locations there. Would it be possible to, if you wanted this to be a pure web app, would it be possible to have like a window or a tab there where you could just, when you added those new points, to just have that text be there? So if somebody wanted to just like copy and paste that text, they could do that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. We have something similar in HAX where you can get the contents of the body area as HTML. So that would be very doable.
Yeah, I could see that being particularly useful for like instructors who just want to add like a few more tags to an image or something like that.
Right. And don't want to like download an app or run like a server to do it. Right. Yep. Yeah, it could be just pure front end. Well, cool. I'll keep you guys updated on the progress.
It's looking good, man.
Thanks.
Reed, queued up, buddy.
Yep.
You're gonna show us a date element.
Mm-hmm.
Good, because then that means I didn't have to make it. So it's a huge win.
All right. So it's a data element. I haven't worked on the. I'm having some confusion with the HAX wiring, but I think I'm getting past it. This is something that I read, but
yeah, you can delete that. We need to update the docs.
Yeah, I realized that when I could not find any components that had it.
So when we originally made them, there was a dependency you needed. And you had to import it in order to leverage it. And then based on feedback from some people, I was able to refactor it so that there's no dependency. So yeah, some older stuff in docs will still point to it, unfortunately.
But yeah, here. It is it creates these data objects, and there's some CSS stumbling that I'm having just because I am not super well versed in all the uses and the all that stuff. But and this is on purpose, all this. But these all this is a 100 size margin just to test the margin. But they all have a nice little shadow when you mouse over the main part. And they've got, if you actually include a title, which is this section then you actually get your details pane. Otherwise, it's completely empty. So I've got just all those in here. These are just randomly including and not including these separate areas. Oops. So they include, bring that over. Some of them include the day, some of them don't, and that just changes whether it renders or not. And this is just an experiment for me just to figure out how to dynamically render these sort of things. And that all comes out of these statements where I am checking whether or not it even exists. And it's just simply, if you don't include it, then it does not show up. Which I guess is easier. And you mentioned that I have this simple colors, or I'm using simple colors. I'm still not quite clear on how simple colors works, so I'm just having not even like a theme or anything. I just like choose blue in the CSS. But now that I saw what you presented, I think that I might understand this better on how to use it. But all the colors are coming out of simple colors.
Yeah, if you just if you switch that word blue to accent, then as long as you're extending that class, you'll have the accent color and dark properties that you can switch.
And then I would have to declare my accent type, or
the default is gray, unless in your constructor you could put this dot accent color equals blue, so that if they don't specify, they'll get blue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. After Brian's presentation, I think I had most of the understanding of how it worked, but that bridged the gap actually for that. But right now it's just not good. Just typed blue and gray in there, but I will change that once this is all over. But actually, before I was thinking like, oh, maybe I could just do like the return HTML and then a plus, and then have something. I had a function up here that was just a constant that was being returned, and it was an HTML type, but lit element does not appreciate that happening. It was just. Oh, sorry.
Where's the nth? Do you have an nth function somewhere?
That's it's just checking for the date. It returns the suffix.
Ordinals.
But yeah.
Nice.
I stole most of the logic, but the person on Stack Overflow was like, "Oh, this would be a good exercise." So here's most of the code to whoever asked the question about creating something like that. So.
Well, yeah, you could either, and then you could. I mean, it wouldn't make a ton of sense to export it from here, but nth is a perfect example of how lazy certain JavaScript developers are, because someone somewhere probably has nth as a npm package, and they're importing nth just to get that function. But creating dependency trees, that's how you end up with like the left pad debacle. And that actually happened again recently. Someone had some like 2-line function that everybody used, and they published it wrong, and it broke hundreds of thousands of projects.
There's a camel sick of Bob one that's literally just the regex.
But yeah, the IST Ice Cream Social, just it was, I don't know, I guess a good experience with working with this. I would like to sort of have a drop shot on this as well, but this is my first time using span actually, so just getting through some of the kinks of like how there's that empty space since it's right next to this, but this is just made out of a div, so it's just sort of creating that empty spot. But yeah, I just need to mess with it until I understand how it actually works. Also, just having the right width, like a consistent width between these items, is definitely something that I should do. But yeah, it's all
Nice.
all that was, I think.
Well, and then you could abstract so that div area where it says class equals card, right? That could be abstracted as like, Monopoly card or whatever. I commonly see those called Monopoly cards. So like Monopoly card or something like that, right? That it's its own little thing, and you happen to be using it to display dates in this case. And then the other section, I don't know what that'd be called, but that could be another element as well. It's not as critical, obviously, in that case.
Yeah, I kind of want to steal Monopoly card. So you should break it out.
You're welcome to make a Monopoly card, Nikki. No one's stopping you.
But where's the learning experience for Reed?
Yes, well, Reed is going to graduate here soon, so.
Yes.
Yeah, but he'll miss us, and he'll miss working with us.
So he'll just keep doing work for free.
Yeah,
I was thinking about
we
it.
all do. I mean, technically.
I mean, any work I'm doing from here on out until I get a job is free work.
There you go. Well, you're welcome to do it. We can keep checking back in and offering suggestions on it. I mean, you might be like, oh, it doesn't look that good because CSS or whatever, but I mean, I didn't make any web components in college, so.
This is how you learn this stuff.
Yeah.
There's a ton of stuff I made that, it's not exactly what it would be now, but like it got me to where I am now. And until you do it, you won't figure out, how to do it.
Yeah.
But I want the Monopoly card.
Okay.
It'll be good for you for exposure.
Monopoly card. He's going to Google, like, what's Monopoly?
Who is Monopoly?
Yeah, there was some good.
Oh, yeah.
See?
It's been a while.
Little, like, fact sheet type of thing, color swath.
It looks like Monopoly uses simple colors.
I think Monopoly does use simple color. That would be a good, I mean, incredibly simple, but like that's the stuff that's really effective.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could like turn this into something else. I'm not actually sure. I can't think of anything that this could be used for, but right now it's very specifically this.month, this.date, this.day. So
Break it out to header and content, really.
Yeah.
And then when you use it within your date card, then when you use it, you just, plug in your date card somewhere and then you can put in the header the this.month and in the content put the this.day.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Cool. It's looking good, man. We'll have to
nice.
maybe what we'll do is if you do the simple colors work or try to implement that, then I will make just like a placeholder part in the mono repo just so you don't have to get all the tooling set up. I know you've had issues with that on your computer. Make a placeholder part in the LRN web components repo that has the same name, the date card or whatever, and then that way you could clone the repo and just basically dump your card into it that you've already made, and then get it accepted easily. Because I mean, looks good to me. I mean, obviously we make some tweaks, CSS wise, and do some of that cleanup for color variability. But
You sure you want to graduate? You don't want to stay here with us forever?
I'm
Like
good to
Tom?
graduate.
Tom stayed forever. You don't want to stay forever and make things?
Well, I mean, I graduated, but then I got a job at the university I graduated from. So...
Because you love us. And I don't
Oh.
know if Reed loves us enough to want to stay forever.
oh, we're going there.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I'm good at using the mom guilt.
I'm okay to graduate.
So next up, I think we had Andrew. You had a question.
Yeah, so I've been working on a DI render that I've talked about several different times now, and I implemented the tooltip and got to the point where I was looking at it and I'm not quite happy with what it gives me. It gives me the ability to have you know, sorry, I'm dying over here. A a little bit of a view of something that's hidden, which is great. But I'd like to have a little bit more structure to it and be able to feed a little bit more information. If I could do something along the lines of, honestly, what we were looking at just a little bit ago with the Monopoly card, or something like paper card, or something similar that is going to give a popover type of thing, then that's kind of what I'm looking for. So I was looking to see opinions on that.
I think the technical marketing term is pop. You want to give it pop.
Want something that pops.
Yeah. Any marketing feedback is it just needs to pop.
So a thing that
Or
I
more
have,
movement.
a thing that I have that you could use it for, and I wish I had the demo available, but I have to like upgrade the thing that uses it to lit, is this simple popover. So I am going to share my screen and explain what it is. So what you're seeing here, it's very similar to Simple Tooltip. It's using the absolute position behavior, that element, and then just adding minimal styling. But the thing is, it can contain more than just a one-liner. And if Rich Text Editor was updated to lit element, I'd be able to show you. I'm basically reverse engineering a Wysiwyg editor. And so one of the things that the Wysiwyg editor has is when you insert a link, there's a popover that actually has form fields in it, right? It needed more than just a one-liner. And basically, since this is just a dumb container, you could throw an entire card inside that popover. I mean, you don't
like a
want to
whole
make
nother web component or whatever.
Yes. So you could throw accent card or Monopoly card in there, you know, because somebody really loves us and wants to share the Monopoly card with us. But you could throw anything in there. And the proof is that I could throw a form inside of it. I was actually using simple fields, and, you know, that way I could get like the link URL and all of that, but within a pop-up. So, so it's simple popover. And nice. You just set the for to the ID of the element. It'll even make sure, I believe it now will check if it's not within the same shadow root as the thing with the ID, it will actually go up through the ancestors and search, because I know that's one of the problems with IDs in Shadow DOM. You set it to auto if you want it to just automatically show up. Otherwise, you can kind of toggle the you know, turn the thing back off and on again by setting the for as the ID. And then you have positions like top, bottom, left, or right. And it will, you know, follow you on your page to where those things exist. But yeah, you can pretty much throw anything in it.
And those would be able to, like, I'm guessing, but I want to make sure, the location of that simple popover tag that's where it's down at the bottom, that could actually exist within the text, correct?
Yeah, you could pop it into the bottom of the document, and it should be searching the entire document. If it doesn't, now that I have anchor behaviors doing that, I can go back through. I think I do have it so that as long as the ID is unique, it'll find it.
Yeah, because what I'm looking to do probably is like right around where it has like NataQ, and you have that in strong. Right after that would be probably the information that would be into that popover. So.
Yeah, and when it's not hooked up with an ID and appearing, it's not it's completely hidden. So if you're worried about that element of it.
No, that's great.
Yeah, so if you have any issues or questions about it, let me know. Because as soon as I move back to Rich Text Editor, which is my answer to the text editor, I'll be looking at it again anyway.
Cool deal. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep, no problem.
You were going to show something else today too, Nikki?
Yeah, so, and I can't believe we're not bored with this yet. I've been doing more stuff in Storybook. One of the things that Storybook now does is I now have it being able to add CSS. When I can configure it. And so I've got CSS slots, I've got properties, I've got empty slots here that take the HTML. Nav card is now in there. So this is just a nav link. It's the one where if you, you know, if you are hovering anywhere on the card, it's going to deal with that link so you can keep it short. So that one's up there and it's got CSS properties. And then I worked on gallery and added a masonry layout. It still needs a little bit of work yet, but as I was doing gallery and gallery grid, I was having too much fun trying to troubleshoot it with Storybook and just decided to take it one step further. And so now gallery has this layout ability to switch between those three. And what I try to do is the gallery and the timeline and the Alley Media Player will actually take objects and arrays for some of their data. But if you wanted to do it use progressive enhancement, they'll all detect slots. So in anything that has a progressive enhancement option, when I was putting together our Storybook, I created a with slots example, which just shows you what the semantic HTML would look like if you wanted to do it that way. A biggie that I'm still working some of the kinks out to is that I now have Alley Media up and available to look at in Storybook. And so Alley Media has an audio player that uses, you know, data or a slot. See, in the slot, you can see, you can just put audio in there and it's got an interactive transcript. It's got the YouTube piece, and the YouTube piece will take both the slotted iframe or data, and then we've got the regular video player. Like I said, there are still some kinks. A lot of them are around some of the ways that we import external libraries, and so I've got to figure that out. But I was able to get this going and to get the VTT files up and running thanks to Polymer Slack, the OpenWC channel, because Rollup wasn't grabbing me the files that I needed. And now I was able to get some of our demo files. And, you know, because of CORS issues, you have to have the VTE where the page is that is loading them. But yeah, so I've been putting all of these pieces up. I wanted to show how I did that, and I talked about it a little bit last time. This is a scaffolded model I've been working on. And so one of the easiest examples was the idea that you could say, make an element from a class and put in the element name. It would look for the static get tag and know what tag to write. And then this would be any of the things that you want to set defaults for. Otherwise, it's going to first look to see if there are HAX properties on it. If it's HAX capable and has HAX properties, it's just going to use those for setting up the knobs. If not, it's just going to build it off of the regular lit data types. And so that's the easiest way to make one of these happen. And this is Studio, really simple. I mean, you basically just have these connections to my data files that you could tweak. Now, it doesn't recognize that you could upload a file there because, again, it's just recognizing that there's a string. So it's just doing a text field because there's no HAX properties on this. You know, making it a little more complex, I also added, you know, this is where after this setting of defaults in the make element from class, you can do this little bit here where you're adding an array of additional properties. So that one was which one? accent card. So if we go back up to accent card. So this is the properties, the slots, and the CSS tag. What I'm doing here is just defining this as CSS so that it ends up in a separate CSS tab. And I can even set the regular variables here as well. And that's all using my Storybook utilities here. And that's how I'm doing that. So the easiest thing is making it from the class, giving it defaults, but then we can also define what kind of tabs might be in it. I think gallery gets a little more complex, or not. I guess gallery does not get more. Yeah.
So you want to draw those from the demos you'd mentioned before we started recording?
Yes. So one of the things is for the very simplest ones, what I should just do is pull the demo data, the defaults from your demos. The thing that I'm running into is I would like to go a step beyond your demos, in that I noticed that what you have is you have all the properties for the defaults mapped as JSON, but for the slot, you just have it listed as content instead of, instead of separating out each of the slots if something had multiple slots.
Well, you can you could write multiple slots in there, yeah.
Okay.
So it's just a.
So right now
Go
I
ahead.
just didn't know if you had like a set format, because if we have like a decided upon format and we're mapping the slots in there, and even some of the CSS, it would be very easy for me to then, pull some of that into how Storybook Utils deals with it. And so some of these things that aren't very complex could just, I could just spell it all out in the demo.
So so like Video Player has one.
You pull up the video player.
Yeah, if you pull up Video Player's HAX wiring. First one. And then scroll all the way down.
I believe that's the one I was looking at.
So, what that is, demo schema is now available. I have to add it to the documentation, although we're going to burn down our docs anyway, so that's why I haven't. But now on HAX schema, you can define demo schema, which is an array of objects. And these objects are mimicking a internal little data structure that's passed around in HAX called HAX element schema. So this is like the simplest way that you can take an element in the DOM and convert it to a little JSON blob and then still get the exact same thing back on the other side. So I pass things around internal to HAX in this format all the time. It's a really easy way to do like data sanitization stuff. Like I take the element, rip it to this format, and then spit it back into the page. And just the process of doing that, it's really easy to siphon off any XSS or anything. So the content piece of that is literally just putting anything in there. So, I mean, if you had stuff that had slots or whatever, and you put, div slot equals name or whatever, but it wasn't intended to map like to specific slots or anything like that.
Could we extend it so that it does? And maybe content, if it's just a string, is just the unnamed slot. But if it's an object, we break it down.
What advantage does that have?
Mapping it to knobs.
Why would you need to? I'm missing something as far as
because
why the knobs need mapped that way.
So that each separate slot is in its own separate place. Because the whole purpose of a knob is to be able to adjust one piece that's one single discrete piece. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but it would be useful for being able to demo to be able to say, here are the slots. Plus,
Yeah.
if you think about it, like up here, when we define the things, there's usually, well, this one might not be a good example. When we're defining them up here, we're defining them as separate slots and not as one big div. So
Yeah, you also can do just the generic slot with no name as well, but
yeah.
No,
But I mean, or content is anything that is in an unnamed slot, but then we have, with the name slots, could we drop them in here? Would that still map correctly?
I mean, I wouldn't want to put them in properties because
You have style here.
Yeah.
And I would probably break style. Like, it would be, ideally, I would like it to kind of mirror and say, here are properties, here are style, like here's CSS, and here's slots as 3 different objects.
I mean,
Because I'm demanding and I need lots of
yeah,
things.
you like, I mean, you could do that. Have fun refactoring that internal to HAX. It's all like, it's just going, there's so many places where it goes, hey, you gave me a tag and properties, and I'll hydrate the properties into their associated, string values and content. It's not that it can't be done. I'm not opposed to it. It's just style, unfortunately, is bizarre in the DOM because style is an attribute, but yet the individual pieces of it, like in JavaScript, you would access it as whatever dot style dot width and get 100%. But yet if you ask what the style is, it'll just give you a string. If you ask if you ask what the style is as a class, like a classed object, it gives you literally every potential style, whether or not it's the default of the browser or set by the user. So, I mean, you can break it out that way. It just gets a little weird.
Yeah. I just meant for styles that you specifically, like CSS variables and whatnot.
Yeah, and fortunately, thus far, we don't set a lot of styles.
That, and I kind of want to be able to have on the advanced section of HAX the ability to mess with certain HAX exposed CSS variables for power users. Because I want all the things.
No, I know. Yeah, we should probably focus on that instead of the interface being more usable. You're right. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I just,
before I get any further with our million elements to put in Storybook, I think like at least having an idea of, well, why not put some of this shit in demo schema, and anything special I can define in that scaffolded way.
Yeah, I mean, you can also preg split a style property and get an object off of it.
Yeah.
Same with content, but I'm not like horribly like dying on this hill. It's just involves refactoring internal to like HAX is using this so that when you drag and drop, it converts this into an element. So
yeah, I mean, I can live with it the way it is. I just I didn't know how open it was to some adjustments for future use.
The content one I think would be easy to manipulate. The style one might be a little more complicated, just thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Just because of the way that this ends up getting leveraged. But I mean, if it refactors it to make it easier, someone is manually writing this anyway, and the machine is just generating.
Yeah, and it's like, well, it's like, why write it twice? If I can write it once in the demo schema and then it gets pulled over from, if Storybook Utilities knows to look there, then I wouldn't need to do it twice.
Yeah, I would just wonder how much of a refactor that is as to whether you're saving time.
How many elements do we have?
I mean, you're going to make more specific demos most likely anyway. I've seen what you've already made.
There are a lot of, yeah, and then I refactor them so that they don't have to be as specific. But no, that's why I am writing a utilities function so that it eventually does all that work and I have less and less code. Isn't that like the name of the game? But yeah, that was my one big question. The other one we could save for a discussion later about grid plate wiring.
We could do that, or you can open up HAX, or I can open up HAX.
Why don't you?
I mean,
open it up?
I'm not morally opposed to the change you were saying. I wonder at times your like OCD to refactor, whether it actually comes back around and we use those, or if like the people that go to Storybook are going to be mostly a developer audience. And so then we're going to end up writing.
No, the Storybook utilities is for me, so that as I document this shit, I don't have to like write all the demos. That's the whole reason I'm doing this.
Makes sense. Let me go to at least.
But I'd like to know that when I'm writing the demos, I'm also writing these HAX demos, because I think the HAX demo, well, Storybook is interesting for developers. I think what people are really going to want from the CDN is the demos.
Yeah. No, I don't.
So I want to be able to. I want to be able to like kill both. Well, actually, 3 birds with 1 stone: HAX, demos, and Storybook, just by messing with HAX props.
Let's make it.
If you wanna mess with that, then you are more than welcome. But it is in the store. So there's a node to HAX element is thrown around, at least as far as passing it back and forth. Now, fortunately, with the most recent refactor, there's not a ton of this going on. Obviously, even just searching node to HAX element, because we go both directions, right? So there's node to HAX element, which is take some node in the DOM and basically siphon off that information. Just said. This was such a pain in the butt to do, like to figure out that this was how to accomplish this piece right here. But if you get the attribute of style, like I think there's other pieces that dig into it to make sure that it's just as a string. Like I was trying to get it as an object, like you were saying, and it's almost easier to get it as a string and then explode the string into the data object, just because of the way that.
Because you're reading in existing elements.
Yes.
And I'm dealing with a finite set of self-defined knobs.
Yes.
No, I get it. Like that makes sense. But actually the node to HAX element has me really excited now, because I think that might also be interesting for me.
And then I think there's HAX element to node, maybe?
Yeah, the HAX element to
node. I just forget when I name these ones, because some of these I named forever ago. It's like to content.
Now, is that in HAX itself?
This stuff is in HAX body, is where a lot of these function. The HAX _ body repo has all of the guts of how HAX actually operates. And then the HAX tag is like the general integration. HAX to content, node to content. I'm sure it's in the store somewhere. We have a bunch of, like this, take a node, convert it to static content and rebuild it again. This is how we help maintain data security, so that you're not injecting stuff, is that whenever there's operations involving the content of the page, where I'm always converting it into a data object and then running a function to make the data object convert it back into what it is. But there's some helpers in here you can definitely look through, and I'm not opposed to redoing that. It just, I don't actually know off the top of my head what the implication of that piece being rewritten is.
Okay. No, I can work around that. I just thought I'd ask the question.
Oh, questions, gosh.
I know.
There's also some awesome comments in here. I'll tell you ahead of time. If you look in Guess Gizmo, the fact that even works is, this is some of the most complex logic I've ever written, probably. So yeah, and I say, oh my God, we just found a property.
I love that your comments tell a story. It's like stream of consciousness.
I can't believe I got that work. I mean, the thing that lets you search NASA and then it knows dynamically what it can convert NASA into is just rather ridiculous. But here we go. So like there's HAX element prototype. right? This ends up generating a very similar structure, although this will pass along Gizmo, which is, our code name for that piece of the data blob. The grid plate thing is what I was looking at.
Do I need to like drum roll?
Wrapping up on time here almost, but internal to HAX. So this is what I was bringing up to Nara's developer, and this is Nikki was asking about if we can make something that's abstracted to be a grid plate. So we have a grid-plate tag, and then HAX treats it like a first-class element, even though it's not part of HAX. And it's because we needed something to do grids. And so the major difference between like what grid allows and other things is it passes certain tests that say, hey, this is a grid. And so because things say it's a grid, it's handled slightly differently when it comes to like content being pasted. It's handled slightly differently in the body as far as dictating. Technically, HAX is maintaining in state what is active and then what is the active parent tag. And I've gone back and forth about dropping the connotation of parent tag because you can always calculate what that is very easily, right? You just go up to the parent. But you could easily get into rather sophisticated scenarios with like the timeline tag, right? Where the timeline or a gallery has a series of complex content within it, and that the parent of that complex content isn't necessarily the DOM nodes that are above it. It might be, well, you want to move the timeline around. So the timeline is the parent, but this slotted content way down here that shows you a card, that card, even if it's active and you can modify it, should be reporting that the parent is, the timeline, for example. Yeah. So there are some very hard coded types of statements occasionally in HAX that are around, like, if this is a grid plate, right?
So how hard would it be to kind of to HAX propertyify, if I can use that, something into being some kind of a grid plate type?
Yeah, I don't think that would be terribly crazy. You're saying that we would have something in HAX body behaviors.
Yeah, so in the
kind
HAX,
of like how I just added the demo schema, really, because that was
like when we add the HAX properties, there might be a property that says, I don't know what we want to call it, like a grid plate type, or
so it could be like type grid plate, and we could have some like dedicated, because right now there's grid plates and there's things that aren't grid plates. We could assume everything that doesn't define type is not a grid plate as an easy API extension.
Well, and then what types of tags can, what types of children it can accept?
Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, if you want to explore adding that, especially because you're working on other tags that will increasingly get into this phenomenon.
Yeah, because right now, like, you're just adding those things as properties within the code editor. But when I saw that the email that you and I got, I'm like, well, that is something that I want to do, especially when I get back to rich text editor and table editor. I want to be able to, have these containers, but also limit what can go inside of them.
So this helps then. This is how I added support for demo schema. So there's some validation functions in HAX and for various purposes. So it could integrate with vanilla and external systems. It is a horrific mess of the way that it works, but ultimately everything comes to this this.set HAX properties. And so it takes in the properties, the tag, some context of what's dictating this, and then whether or not HAX is ready. And then it does, it more or less does API validation that you are correctly using HAX schema, so that you can't just put whatever you want in there and then, or you write it as broken JSON and it somehow doesn't work. So this will do things like, hey, if we're using API 1, right, so that then in the future we could have API 2 or whatever if we end up, drastically modifying this, but we haven't yet. Then it gets into each of the like, hey, does it have canned properties? And this is, I think, the important part from data validation standpoint. If we're adding anything to this, we need to support backwards compatible, like that we didn't have it. So in this case, if you didn't define can position, which is whether or not it can have the float left or right, is effectively what that is. But if you didn't define it, then just say that you can. If you didn't have scale, just say that you can. If you didn't say whether or not you can edit source. So it does a little bit of like API repairing almost as far as the schema. If you don't have a gizmo, then I say false. And gizmo is that whole thing that basically makes it show up in the UI as something you can drag and drop on. Then there's setting, the rest of the settings, right? But then for demo schema, I added, hey, well, if you don't have demo schema, then add it as just an array, right? So it's just an empty array, so it validates. And then I have a prototype HAX properties call. And this can be used by other things to basically fill in the gaps. So imagine that this is like a generic working HAX schema object with everything filled out. It would also make it easier if someone wanted to, call that up and piece through it and see what it is if they start digging in the weeds. But I don't think it would be terribly difficult to add that. It would just be more a question of, well, are we adding just grid plates? Are we adding types of tags? Are we saying this is a type of tag that is a grid plate? Is that
what we originally envisioned, the blocks versus stacks? Like a block was a thing that you filled in, and a stack was more like a template with. So
yes,
a block was a container.
Yeah, in the way that stacks and blocks have worked out as far as the API, that is effectively what it still is. It's just that they get loaded in a slightly different way, and the stacks are. It's in the demo here.
What are we using that blocks namespace for then?
In the App Store, blocks more or less dump in predefined like grid column things. I mean, we could gut that because now it's irrelevant because of how we read it.
You're not using it right now?
I mean, it still shows up in the UI if it's available, but it's not nearly as important now that we have the grid plate stuff in a really good space.
Yeah, we could, because if we can revisit that, like maybe that's what it is that we call it a block. And then it's sort of, here's what it accepts, and, here, maybe it whitelists or maybe it blacklists things, but here's what this tag can take within its containers.
Yeah, I'll open up an issue to have a placeholder for conversation in the future as a reminder of that.
I'm not ready to look at it yet.
Because we do need to hash that out more.
But it's definitely, as soon as I pivot away from Studio, or Studio may make me pivot to it, that was next on my big roadmap of Nikki things to do.
Fortunately, because GitHub is just so wonderful, I've already assigned you to fill out the issue in the time it took there. And now we've accomplished something. And we're at 5 o'clock, so we're
hey.
So yay, we made it to the end of another week. Welcome to the end of week 8. I'm sure we'll be back next week for week 9, as we are still all in web component quarantine. If you want to get more involved in our projects, make sure you hit up hackstheweb.org or elmsln.org. Has a lot of details on both of them about different things we work on. We also have a Slack channel that you can find links as to how to get involved from there. Otherwise, if you go to bit.ly/HAX Slack, HAX Slack, then it'll give you an invite link shortcut and you can come in and chat with us and jump on Uncode as well. So have a good week, everybody.